Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 321, The History of Kyiv. Last time, we covered the history of St. Petersburg. Today, we finish the series on the great cities of Russia with one of the oldest, Kyiv. It has a truly mixed history, rich before the 13th century and after the mid-19th. In between, it was forced to recover from a series of devastating invasions and sieges. It went from a city of 100,000 in the year 1050 to 50 or 100 people in 1241, not fully recovering for centuries thereafter. Before we get into its history, let's talk about the city in 2025. Of course, the 800-pound elephant in the room is the war with Russia and its effect on the capital city of Ukraine. Currently, it is the 7th most populated city in Europe with 3 million inhabitants. It lies on both sides of the Dnieper River, the 4th longest one in Europe. It is bordered by the Polesian lowland, which is characterized by sandy lowlands with large, mostly swampy valleys. The Kyiv Mountains, or Kyiv Hills, surround it, ranging in height from about 150 to 200 meters tall. Due to the incredible damage it saw during the Nazi invasion in World War II, over 70% of its current architecture was built after 1950. Still, much of that went uncompleted as the Soviet Union was running out of money, and Kyiv's rebuilding wasn't at the top of the list. There are a number of older buildings, such as the St. Sophia Cathedral and the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, also known as the Monastery of the Caves. The most imposing structure is Mother Ukraine, originally called Motherland. It is a 62-meter or 203-foot tall titanium statue built in the late 1970s to commemorate those who died in defense of the Soviet Union during World War II. Its Soviet emblem, found on the shield, was removed in 2003 and replaced by the Ukrainian trident. Now is the time to delve into the history of Kyiv. Kyiv has a very long history, with the first settlements found by archaeologists being over 25,000 years old. Officially, its founding was designated as being in the year 482, which was celebrated in 1982 as the 1500th anniversary. According to legend, Saint Andrew, one of Jesus' disciples, visited the site where the city would be built in the year 60 or 70. However, the other legend that seems more plausible is that the city was founded by 3 brothers, Ki, Sheshek, and Korev, and their sister Libid. They then named the town after the oldest brother, Ki. This was a story supposedly written by the monk Nestor, who resided in the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, which we've said was also known as the Kyiv Monastery of the Caves. The writing is known as the Primary Chronicles, or Tale of Bygone Years. This claim of an early Kyiv contradicts some archaeological evidence. Omeljan Pritask, former professor of Ukrainian history at Harvard University, said that, quote, "Beyond any doubt that Kyiv as a town did not exist before the last quarter of the 9th to the first half of the 10th century." While the dispute continues, with some historians and archaeologists claiming evidence of a settlement existing before the 9th century, it is clear there was a hill fortress called Sambat in the general vicinity of modern-day Kyiv. The area was an important stop within an extensive trade route used by the Khazars and other Magyars. Trade between the Scandinavians and the Byzantine Empire went through this region in the 7th and 8th centuries. However, the earliest verifiable written knowledge of the city's existence is that it was a Slavic settlement that paid tribute to the Khazars before 880 AD. This is about the time that the Varangians conquered it and made it the capital of what would be known as Kievan Rus. Oleg the Wise, also known as Helgi, conquered Kyiv in 881, although there is some dispute about this assertion. The counterclaim is that the city continued to pay tribute to the Khazars until the 920s. Well, over the following decades, the Varangians became increasingly Slavicized, with the full conversion coming in 988, with the adoption of Orthodoxy as the state religion under Vladimir the Great, also known as Voldemir. After Oleg died, his son would take control. Now, he would be murdered by the Drevelians in 945. His death and the subsequent revenge his wife Olga enacted upon the Drevelians is legendary. The Byzantine historian and chronicler Leo the Deacon provides us with a vivid description of how Igor, Olga's husband, met his death. Quote, they had bent down two birch trees, to the prince's feet and tied them to his legs. They let the trees straighten again, thus tearing the prince's body apart. Olga's revenge was brutal. She had one set of envoys from the Drevelians thrown into a trench and buried alive. The second group was asked to bathe themselves before presenting themselves to her, which they did, but the bathhouse was set ablaze before they could leave. The third attack on the Drevelians was when she invited 5,000 of their people to join her in a funeral feast in honor of Oleg. Now, they all got drunk, and they were sufficiently inebriated, and she had her soldiers kill all of them. Lastly, after laying siege to their town, she gave them a way out, claiming that she would leave if they gave me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. They did, and she had a sulfur-based incendiary cloth attached to the birds, released them, and watched as they returned to their original homes, burning them and the people inside. The golden age of Kievan Rus occurred in the mid-11th century, especially under the rule of Yaroslav the Wise. One of their sons, one of the sons of Vladimir, Yaroslav, would reign from 1019 to 1054, increasing the size and influence of the city. One of his crowning achievements in terms of architecture would be the construction of the St. Sophia Cathedral in 1037. It is one of the city's best-known landmarks and the first heritage site in Ukraine to be included in the World Heritage List, along with the Kyiv Cave Monastery Complex. Over the next few centuries, Kyiv grew in size, population, and prestige. By the 11th century, it was one of the most populated cities in Europe. Grand princes like Sviatoslav I began a policy of expansion, followed by Vladimir, Sviatopolk I, Yaroslav the Wise, and Vladimir Monomakh. The grand princes that followed Vladimir Monomakh weakened the principality to the point of it being far less influential than its rival regions like Tver and Vladimir. Yuri Dolgoruki would be the last effective ruler of Kyiv, dying in 1157. The collapse of Kyiv first occurred in 1169, when the town was raided and mostly destroyed by Andrei Bogolyubsky, whose army sacked the old town. While it was still a cultural mecca, its political importance faded. It would be followed by another sack by the forces of Rurik Rostislavich, becoming the Grand Prince of Kyiv in 1204. Danielo of Galicia would invade and capture Kyiv in 1239, but that wouldn't last long, as the Mongols took the city in 1240, completely devastating it. As I mentioned earlier, in the 11th century, Kyiv's population was estimated at about 100,000. After the Mongol invasion, it had just a few hundred, if even that many. It would not recover its pre-invasion number until 1870, some 750 years later. Kyiv would suffer additional humiliation when Metropolitan Maximus relocated his seat to Vladimir in 1299. In 1362, Kyiv would become part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. During its time under Lithuanian rule, its Jewish population would grow. Sigismund II Augustus, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, granted equal rights to Jews in the city, which was highly unusual during this period in European history. This would cause a significant increase in conflict between the Orthodox and Catholic churches. It would also be a major reason why Kyiv had a large Jewish population until the invasion of the Nazis in 1941. In 1483, forces led by Menli Giray, Khan of the Crimea, sacked the city once again. Two more sieges led by Tatar forces further devastated Kyiv in 1496 and 1500. Under Polish rule, the Orthodox Church members would gain strength in defiance of the increasing pressure to convert by the Polish Catholic nobility. Metropolitan Moglia of Kyiv and Galicia created the Kyiv Molia Academy, an educational institution aimed to preserve and develop Ukrainian culture and Orthodox faith to counter the increasing pressure. In 1648, Bohdan Klementensky declared that the Zaporozhian Cossacks were now in control of Kyiv. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, though, would not recognize this declaration, which would lead to open conflict between the two sides. This would lead to the signing of the Treaty of Pereyaslav, which aligned the Cossacks and the city of Kyiv with the Tsardom of Russia. Unfortunately, this treaty, signed in 1654, did not come into effect as the Commonwealth refused to acknowledgement. Yuri Khmelnytsky, the son of the now deceased Bohdan, signed the Second Treaty of Pereyaslav in October 1659 to further the claim of partnership with Russia. The Truce of Andrusovo, signed on January 31st, 1667, would begin the process of ceding Kyiv, along with Smolensk and Chernihiv, to Russia. The Eternal Peace of 1686 would finalize the annexation. Kyiv would remain autonomous for the most part until the reign of Catherine the Great in 1775. What is fascinating is that none of the Polish-Russian treaties concerning Kyiv have ever been ratified. Now, since it stays within the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Kyiv's governance was run under what is known as the Magdeburg Rights. This gave the city a degree of internal autonomy, but this would be abolished by Nicholas I on December 23, 1834. The following centuries saw the construction of many churches and other structures, including the Cathedral of the Epiphany, St. Nicholas Cathedral, Florivsk Convent, the Lavra Bell Tower, the Fountain of Samson, the Mariinsky Palace, and St. Andrew's Church. While now firmly in the hands of the Russian Empire, Kyiv was still very much a Polish center. In 1812, there were 43,000 Polish noblemen versus 1,000 of Russian descent. The reverse, though, can be said about the general population. Poles made up only 10% of the population at the time. Polish was taught in schools until the 1860s, when policies of Russification were introduced. This would accelerate under the rule of Tsar Alexander III. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Kyiv became a center of Ukrainian culture, even though it was still not the capital. It wasn't until the Russian Industrial Revolution in the 19th century that Kyiv began to blossom and grow exponentially. In 1934, it became the capital of Soviet Ukraine. The dramatic increase in Russian immigrants to Kyiv bolstered the Russification project. By the end of the 19th century, 56% of the city's population spoke Russian, 23% spoke Ukrainian, 12.5% spoke Yiddish, 7% spoke Polish, and 1% spoke Belarusian. With the population booming, Kyiv would become an industrial hub of the Russian Empire, especially when it came to exporting goods to Europe. Because of its location, it would become a perfect spot to send grains and other agricultural products through its rail lines and place on the Dnieper River. Another major development in Kyiv was its aviation industry, which was begun by two men, Pyotr Nesterov and Igor Sikorsky. The latter was the man who signed the immigration papers for my parents and brother to come to the United States in 1953. Sikorsky designed the first working helicopter, which was built and flown in Kyiv. Although it didn't have enough horsepower to carry a person, it was the prototype for his plans once he made it to the United States. The 1930s saw a lot of suffering in the city of Kyiv due to Stalin's collectivization program. It would begin the genocide known as the Holodomor. All the food was rationed, and even bread was hard to come by. Lines would form blocks long to be able to buy even a few slices of bread. Sometimes people would wait overnight to try to feed their families. During the Great Purge of the 1930s, thousands of residents of Kyiv were arrested and executed and dumped into mass graves like the ones at Babi Yar and Bakivnia, into mass forests. Tens of thousands would be sent to gulags throughout the Soviet Union, many of whom would either die on their way there or while incarcerated. Between January 1934 and May 1938, 167,000 Ukrainian communists, about one-third of the party in the country, were arrested. One of the groups targeted by the purges in Kyiv and throughout Ukraine were those people with a Polish heritage. Many of those arrested had families that had lived in the capital for centuries. According to wardocumentary.info, native Poles comprised an enormous 19% of all people arrested in Ukraine in 1937 and 38, and amounted to 55,928 people, of which 47,327 were shot and 8,601 sent to the Gulag camps. This is a considerable number, as people with Polish heritage only comprise 1.5% of the total population of Ukraine. Unfortunately for Kyiv, things would get even worse, as it was once again be totally destroyed in World War II when the Nazis invaded. One of the horrific tragedies of the war occurred in the outskirts of the city known as the Massacre at Babin Yar, also known as Babi Yar, on September 29th and 30th, 1941. According to reports sent to the Einsatzgruppen headquarters in Berlin from Kyiv, 33,771 Jews were massacred during this 2-day period. It has been estimated that over 100,000 people were murdered in the 2-year period of Nazi occupation in the ravine at Babi Yar. The Germans tried to hide their murderous rampage, but eyewitnesses came forth and told the true story of what went on there. Dina Pronicheva gave the following absolutely chilling testimony in January 1946 to Soviet authorities. Quote, "Each time I saw a new group of men and women, elderly people, and children being forced to take off their clothes. All were being taken to an open pit where submachine gunners shot them. Then another group was brought. With my own eyes I saw this horror. Although I was not standing close to the pit, terrible cries of panic-stricken people and quiet children's voices calling, "Mother, Mother," reached me. What struck me in my research here was that no memorial was constructed at the site by Soviet authorities until 1976. And even then, no mention of the Jewish murders was found on the monument. It wasn't until September 1991 that a menorah-shaped memorial to the Jewish victims of Babi Yar was erected on the 50th anniversary of the mass shooting. This would not be the only humiliation that the Jewish population would face, as another anti-Semitic pogrom would occur between September 4th through the 7th in 1945, with over 100 Jews being beaten by fellow Ukrainians. After the war, Kyiv was totally rebuilt and saw rapid socioeconomic growth. It became a center of aerospace, microelectronics, and precision optics industries, and an important military center of the Soviet Union. Because of this, Kyiv saw a large migration from many parts of Ukraine and Russia. By 1960, its population grew to 850,000, and 5 years later, it had over 1.3 million inhabitants. In 1985, close to 2.5 million people lived in Kyiv, but they would face a catastrophe the following year due to the Chernobyl disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986. The Chernobyl power complex was only 90 kilometers, or near 60 miles north of the Ukrainian capital. No one knows how many people in Kyiv were affected by the radiation leak, as the Soviet Union at the time did not want that information to come out. Kyiv became the capital of an independent Ukraine in 1991 after serving as the capital of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic since 1934. On February 24, 2022, Kyiv would come under attack from Russian forces, with a missile attack being launched on October 10th. The city is still suffering from sporadic missile and drone attacks. Their mayor, former heavyweight boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, has become an international symbol of Ukrainian resistance. Even though he accused President Zelensky of authoritarianism due to his imposition of martial law after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we have something really incredible. We cover the kangaroo court trial of 21 Bolsheviks, which included Nikolai Bukharin, Alexei Rykov, and Genrik Yagoda. Because of a gift my brother gave me for this Christmas, which is the entire court proceedings translated into English of the trial held in Moscow between March 2nd and 13th in 1938. So, until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.